You know, I feel like a lot of you guys are being pretty unfair to Chris Ballard, and I know that that statement in of itself is going to turn some of you off. I know that some of you are ready to shut off this video right now, but I feel like as a fan base, particularly one that has faced the turmoil that we have faced, and when I say turmoil for the Indianapolis Colts fans, I'm talking about not being 13-3, 11-5, going into the playoffs, having the best quarterback in the world, all of these things, right? Turmoil for us, and in fairness, I don't want to dismiss it. We've really been through a lot these past few years, and we're looking for somebody to point the finger at. And I feel when we talk about Chris Ballard, sure, we can mention the 45-52-1 record, which I feel like is skewed. I feel like we take part in some revisionist history, and we kind of forget what the context was going into every season, which is why earlier in this week, I mentioned the importance of establishing an expectation going into this season. So as we get caught up in the emotion throughout the course of the season, week by week, we don't lose sight of what we were actually looking at here. And I know everyone looks at the roster now and says it's trash, and we all talk about bargain bin Ballard, this, that, and the next. But I feel you guys have been unfair, at least you that don't like Chris Ballard. For those of you who like Chris Ballard, I'm obviously preaching to the choir, but I'm talking to those of you who don't like Chris Ballard. I'm hoping that after I kind of set the record straight and tell what I think is the truth about his time in Indianapolis so far, that maybe you'll come around on him a little bit, or at least just have a little bit more patience with the guy, because again, I think we're looking at this thing and kind of forgetting what really happened here. So I want to try to refresh your memory. And without further ado, we're going to get right into it. But, you know, as I normally do, I'm going to introduce myself quickly. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride the Bench Colts cast. As always, if you are enjoying the show, if you love the Colts as much as me or more, go ahead and shoot the video a like. I'm hoping to have a huge season over here. I want to turn this thing into the biggest damn Colts podcast, the biggest and the best in the entire world. Now, I have a lot of work to do, but it all starts with you shooting that like and helping me get out to as many people as humanly possible. Of course, if you're enjoying it so much that a like is not enough, that's when you could subscribe, particularly if you're a returning listener. You've been here 4, 5, 6, 8 times. You just keep listening to me in my bedroom talking about the Indianapolis Colts. Now would be the time to subscribe, but if you're here for the first time, go ahead and enjoy the ride. In fact, everyone enjoy the ride and enjoy the episode. And why don't we get into it, right? So let's talk about where the Indianapolis Colts were at when Chris Ballard was brought in, okay? So we were coming off of, I forget what the record that season was. What was it, 8-8? Someone tell me in the comment section what we were in 2016. All I remember about that time is that we were generally pretty lackluster. This was a team that had a quarterback in Andrew Luck for quite a while now, and we knew how great Andrew was, right? And we knew we didn't have the offensive line to protect him, which is why we ultimately got rid of Ryan Grigson. And we knew that the team basically was underachieving in terms of having a quarterback of that caliber, at least by our own standards, right? And the best stretch we had played under that Ryan Grigson, Chuck Pagano era was really with the interim head coach and Bruce Arians. And obviously Chuck, what he was going through, I mean, no disrespect to Chuck at all, we couldn't take the job from Chuck, despite the fact that all of us between Chuck Pagano and Bruce Arians are very much aware of who the better head coach was. Not just now, at the time we knew who the better head coach was, and we knew the decision we made, because you can't just in good faith have Chuck Pagano lose his job after dealing what he dealt with. But ultimately we did, right? So we come in, we disappoint, we fire Ryan Grigson because we can't protect Andrew Luck worth a lick, which obviously we dealt with the consequences of that. You know, I need not remind you, right? I mean, we all know what happened. This is part of our trauma. And then we go into the 2017 season with Chris Ballard for the very first time. We end up with no Andrew Luck. Now, a lot of people, would you believe me if I told you that Chris Ballard in his entire reign only had Andrew Luck one season? I think even I forgot that. I had to go back and refresh myself. He only had one season of Andrew Luck, okay? So we go into the 2017 season. That was the mysterious shoulder injury. He went from maybe being ready to week 1 to being out for the first month to ultimately not playing the entire season, right? We trot out there with Scott Tolzien, who has to be one of the worst Indianapolis Colts in the history of football, okay? And then, of course, we bring in Jacoby Brissett. We trade for him from the Patriots. and he gets a start on essentially, I don't know, 3 days of practice with the team. Do you remember that story? He was out there on, I think, Thursday night football playing with like 30% of the playbook tops. So that was what we were dealing with in the 2017. Ultimately, Ballard goes 4-12 that season. The Colts go 4-12 that season. A team that was already starting to slide just a little bit under Chuck Pagano anyway. So now they get rid of Chuck Pagano, and we go into the 2018 season, and we trade back with the New York Jets in that draft. Remember what I said about Grigson and what we all know. We could not protect this quarterback in Andrew Luck worth a damn, okay? 2018 comes. We trade back with the New York Jets. We get Quentin Nelson at the number 6 pick and Shaquille Leonard in the second round. Let's not forget, in that Jets trade, remember, Ballard's first full offseason where it was like his guys, his coach, the whole deal. Obviously, he hired Frank Reich. Well, really, he hired Josh McDaniels, that fucking snake, who I don't like. So if you want to hold that against Ballard, in fact, I just gave you some ammunition. He went and hired Josh McDaniels, who's a scrub, okay? We bring in Frank Reich. We get Quentin Nelson. We get Shaquille Leonard. One of those Jets picks also turns into Braden Smith. So in 2018, in theory, even though Braden Smith wasn't drafted till the year after, if I'm not mistaken, Chris Ballard took this offensive line that we could not do anything with, and within one offseason draft trade, ends up giving us 2 cornerstone linemen that we have to this very day, okay? So now we come out, Luck in 2018 coming off of not playing football for an entire season, let alone the lacerated kidney back in 2016. Now the injuries were already a concern for Luck. He comes in, they go out 10-6 with Andrew Luck after Ballard gets a nice full offseason with his head coach, his draft, and the whole deal, right? So now that is how that goes. Now back to 2019, that's when the man retired. So this was it. Ballard comes in for the 2017 season. He gets no Luck. He comes out, he gets Luck after practically a year and a half off, and then Luck immediately goes and retires on him. But don't forget, again, the line in Indianapolis went from atrocious, unacceptable, to one of the best in football within the first 2 or 3 years of Chris Ballard. Let's not forget what the narrative was around Chris Ballard when he first came around, okay? So that was him. That was nobody else. You want to talk about roster assembly? This man turned around the offensive line almost instantly. And I know you Matt Pryor people. I'll get there. I'm telling the whole story, okay? Andrew Luck retires. Now, why is this so important? Because I feel like this is where things get controversial, because you have people like me who really give Ballard a pass on many fronts because of what he dealt with Andrew Luck. And I think a lot of people who said, listen, it's not an excuse anymore. Let me tell you why it is an excuse, okay? Let's say, for example, you were, I don't know, trying to learn how to solve a Rubik's Cube, okay? So you go on Google, you say, hey, I want to know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. You start looking up strategies. What you're going to find is that a number of different people have solved the Rubik's Cube before. Therefore, methods have been developed. There's been studies. There's people what to do, what not to do. There's kind of a playbook, and you could learn from other people's mistakes. You don't have to figure it out yourself. When Andrew Luck retired at the age of 28 years old in the middle of his prime, 1 week before the regular season started, the Colts could not go up on Google and look at other teams who had dealt with that situation. The Colts were the first ones to ever deal with that. They wrote the book. Now teams, if they ever have to deal with that situation, could go back and look at how the Colts handled it, and they're the case study. But I feel like that shouldn't get lost. That was a colossally difficult situation that I feel like people like to glaze over like that wasn't a big deal. But you have to think, this was a team when Chris Ballard took over that said we should be contending. We need to build this roster better. And then Ballard comes in, and ultimately to start things off, our roster, and don't pretend that this wasn't what you thought at the time and what everyone thought. This was the league-wide consensus, Colts fans included, that the roster after 2 years of Ballard was significantly better. We were viewed as a perennial AFC contender and a top-tier roster in the NFL. One of the best offensive lines in an up-and-coming defense, okay? So Andrew Luck retires, and we had just built this win-now roster. What a crisis that is. It's an absolute identity crisis. Most teams lose their franchise quarterback, and they have to go draft one and figure it out from there. They're in a rebuilding mode. The Colts were positioned and building to win now, and they had a franchise quarterback retire. Nobody has ever dealt with that. So they had a decision to make. And you know what they decided to do? They said, you know what? We're going to continue to try to win. Now, you could sit here and say it's right or wrong all you want. All I'm saying, to make it like it's some sort of blunder by Ballard to try to win, particularly when now you guys say, hey, I just want to win some games. We're trying to win a Super Bowl. What do you think we were trying to do this entire time? Okay, it's not until this season that things have changed. So we go into the 2020 season, and somehow we end up with Phillip Rivers. We get him, he comes along, and we go 11-5 that season. We draft Michael Pittman Jr., we draft Jonathan Taylor. We trade the first round pick in the 2020 draft for DeForest Buckner. So after Luck retires, we go 7-9 in 2019. But I kind of glazed over that season. We go 7-9 with Jacoby Brissett, Brian Hoyer. Okay? That was a tumultuous season. Is that Chris Ballard's fault? Let's start there, because I'm a little all over the place. Is it Chris Ballard's fault that Andrew Luck retired in the middle of his prime when we were building a win now roster around him? Is that Chris Ballard's fault? Okay, because people make it like that was such a long time ago. It's been 1, 2, 3 seasons since then. 3 seasons, okay? 3 seasons. We go 7-9 without Luck, and then again, I did 2020, we bring in Rivers, we draft Pittman Jr., we draft Jonathan Taylor because we traded our first round pick for DeForest Buckner. So we get 3 cornerstone players, 3 of the best players on our team today, 3 years later. I mean, not that Jonathan Taylor's still an Indianapolis Colt, but done. We ain't talking about Jonathan Taylor. Okay, so we go 11-5 that season, and it is what it is. Now, during this time, 2020, when we were looking at what was wrong with the Indianapolis Colts, and it goes into 2021 as well, was it a roster issue at the time? Did we view it as a roster issue? Because now we're going to rewrite the story like we've just been a shit show in terms of our roster structure the entire time under Chris Ballard, which is what drives me crazy, is you guys make it like we were pointing the finger at Ballard the entire time. We were not. We were looking at the play calling under Frank Reich, and rightfully so. I could think of a number of different occasions where he did something that was questionable, whether it was go for it or not take the points on a field goal. I mean, there's a number of times I would have to actually probably go in and really dive deep to give you the individual plays, but we all know this is true, okay? So 2020 season goes 11-5, bang, Rivers retires. Now, I know is it proven fact that he would have come back for us if we had offered it? Is that a proven fact? Because I might have missed that. It was before I had a show. So if that's true, fine. Carson Wentz comes in. Now, that happened on Chris Ballard's watch, and I was never for a second excited about Carson Wentz, okay? But if you, knowing all of the history between Frank Reich and Carson Wentz, if you were to take a guess on who initiated the move for Carson Wentz, who would you guess it was? Would you say it was Chris Ballard, or would you say it was Frank Reich? Because if you ask me, that was a situation of the GM and Chris Ballard trusting Frank Reich. Because if Carson Wentz wasn't going to figure it out in Indianapolis, he wasn't going to figure it out anywhere at all. So Chris Ballard put his neck out for Frank Reich, and really Frank Reich put his neck out for Carson Wentz, and Carson Wentz was a fucking scrub, as we already knew, but it was what it was. Frank Reich pitched him to the organization as a franchise guy. So now you look at the end of that season, and they end up shipping Wentz out of town, which is the worst kept secret in sports. That was Jim Irsay's decision. That was not Ballard's decision. Listen, I'm happy Irsay drove him out of here, but it did bring a lot of attention to us, and it did bring a lot of negative press. That was not Chris Ballard's fault. That was on Jim Irsay to some degree. Now, yeah, I'm not trying to absolve Ballard entirely of getting Wentz in the process. All I'm saying is, well, let's not sit here and pretend that Carson Wentz was a Chris Ballard guy, okay? So we look at the Wentz season, we say we blew all these leads, but at the same time, there were parts of that season, was it a pipe dream? Maybe, but there was parts of that season where people were looking at the Colts as a potential dark horse to win the Super Bowl before Carson Wentzed, all right? Very Wentzian performance throughout the course of the season. That was what it was. That's how he was, okay? So we're going all the way now from the year 2017 to 2021 without us ever having a question about Chris Ballard, correct? Okay, so now we go into 2022. Well, that's a lie. Some people were calling for Chris Ballard's job after 2021. Again, I don't see how you could justify it given what had gone on to that point. I think Andrew Luck was a valid excuse that entire time. So now they go on to 2022, and they end up with Matt Ryan, who clearly was washed. The guy could not throw, okay? So we could hold that on Ballard all we want. But again, I want to remind you, because I want to hammer this point home, because I feel like people do not give this point enough credit. When Andrew Luck retired, the Colts were in the middle of an identity crisis and a situation that no team in the history of the NFL had ever dealt with before. Now, is hindsight 2020? Yes. But it's not like Chris Ballard was doing things that were clearly and obviously the wrong move. I mean, you look at each one of these seasons, and generally speaking, people felt pretty good. I feel like Wentz's season being the exception, no one was excited about Wentz. I think we were able to convince ourselves to be excited because that's how an offseason goes, kind of like this offseason right here. And then we looked at the final roster cuts. We're like, oh my goodness, right? But we now went into last season with Matt Ryan, and everyone was very excited. Can you name 5 people that you know at all that said that the Colts were going to stink with Matt Ryan? I mean, there was like no one. The national media, who I always say doesn't know shit, but it is what it is. The national media were looking at the Colts and saying, hey, they might be able to get over the hump here with Matt Ryan. And that was what it was. Now, obviously, that season proved to be what it was, the most embarrassing season that I can remember as a Colts fan. At least the one year where we went like 2-14. We knew at the end of the year we were getting Andrew Luck, and we were trotting out there with Curtis fucking Painter. So it wasn't like it was embarrassing in the sense that we stunk, but we weren't supposed to be good. Last year we were supposed to be good. Now, of what we dealt with last season, no one questioned the. I'll say this again. We can talk about Matt Pryor, and that's fine. I think that was one of Ballard's greatest blunders since he became the GM, was leaving Matt Pryor out there at left tackle. Some people talking about Will Fries this year. We'll see how that goes. I think up front, the continuity matters. You look at the line in the second half of last year was much better. Bernard Raymond coming on strong. We still have 3 cornerstone guys. And when I say cornerstone guys, I mean there's a lot of teams in the NFL that would prefer to have Ryan Kelly, Quentin Nelson, or Braden Smith over who they currently have. The depth is suspect, but that would be any offensive line in football. Thank you very much. And now you have Will Fries just being plugged in at right guard, which is much easier to plug in than left tackle. So I'm not saying that Will Fries is the best guard in the world, and I'm not saying he's our future at guard, but do I think he can get the job done this year? Yes. Is it as blatantly, I don't know, obvious that he needs to be replaced as Matt Pryor? No. So I'm not holding that against Ballard right now. Matt Pryor, you can. But we go into that season, and I hope I'm not all over the place here. And when I say I hope I'm not, I mean I know I am, and I'm kind of trying to cover for the fact that I am. But besides the point, last season is a year of complete dysfunction. Now, what did we hear about the Colts last year? The locker room was lost. Going into that season, there were no questions about the roster. The locker room was lost. That's not Chris Ballard. That's Frank Reich. Frank Reich gets fired mid-season, and we hire Jeff Saturday, whose only coaching experience was for a high school football team who I believe did not even perform that well under his tutelage. Was that Chris Ballard? No. Okay, that was Jim Irsay. So you look at what happened last season. How much of that can you possibly put on Ballard? How much of it can you put on Ballard reasonably? Now, if you want to talk about, I always look at it like this. If you have the CEO of Google, right, and he's residing in California. Now, I know this is like not like a perfect one-to-one comparison here, but stick with me. You have the CEO of Google living in California. You have a branch of Google in Arizona, and you have the manager over there, and something goes on in that office. I don't know. They like misplace like $100,000. That's nothing for Google. They misplace $1 million, okay? Even though the manager or the owner, the CEO of Google is in California, and legally he would hold that liability and that would be his responsibility, I think all of us reasonably would say that's fine. But what happened in the office, aka the locker room with Frank Reich, how much of that can you actually reasonably say, hey, this is actually the CEO's fault, or in this case, Chris Ballard? How much of what goes on in that locker room has to do with Chris Ballard? He's supposed to bring in the players and the roster. Who coaches that roster and keeps morale up is not Chris Ballard. That's not his job. So we go ahead, we fire Frank Reich mid-season, and now here we are this season. So I hope I explained that clearly throughout. That 45-52-1 is really not what it looks like, if you ask me. And Howie Roseman, one of the greatest in football as a GM, has a almost identical record to Ballard in his first 5 seasons. You could go ahead and look that up yourself. And they dealt with that horribly dysfunctional season with who at quarterback? Yes, Carson Wentz. And they found a way to recover from that, but that was not an overnight process. And now finally, we are where we are right now. And this is why I talk about the expectation. And this is why I told the story. Because we have finally said, okay, we're done trying to win. We had built a core around Luck, and we tried with these quarterbacks. Enough is enough. That is what last season represented, where Jim Irsay essentially went haywire and let Chris Ballard take the blame, essentially. I don't want to be that way, but that's 100% what happened, is Jim Irsay started running ragged around the organization. Jim Irsay called for Matt Ryan to be benched. He then goes and fires Frank Reich because they stink it up without Matt Ryan on the field, and then he hires Jeff Saturday, and then Chris Ballard is the one answering the questions. Do you see where things get kind of fishy, get a little weird in like us just hating Chris Ballard for it? I mean, I hope that was cohesive enough. And I know, listen, there's going to be those of you who disagree, and that's fine. But again, now we're here where we are now, where the Colts said, hey, finally, we're going to rebuild. And we have one of the youngest rosters in the NFL. And our expectation for this season should be treated as such. And Chris Ballard's job certainly should not be on the line this season. Now, of course, we would like to see improvement. We have to see improvement. We were so bad last year that if it gets any worse, that would be the only scenario in which case I would say that Chris Ballard is not, going to keep a job. But if you're Jim Irsay, how do you do everything you do last year and essentially not force the Colts into the rebuild? Was the right move. Where we're at, retool, whatever you want to call it, where we're at right now is what we should be doing, okay? We're doing it the right way now as opposed to patching it up, from our makeshift kind of trying to figure out an unprecedented situation. Where we are right now is where we should be. Now, do you think Jim Irsay would let him hire the coach, get the quarterback, and start an entire rebuild only to fire him at the end of this season if they just finished 6-11? Do you really think that's what's going on? And after everything I just told you, laying it out, retelling the story season by season so you remember what happened, is Chris Ballard really that bad of a GM? Or has he been a victim of some unfortunate circumstance? And of course, some mistakes himself. Even the great Howie Roseman drafted Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. Okay, it happens. It happens to everyone. It is what it is. You can't win every single decision. But Ballard, I think, for the most part, has been a maestro in the trade market. I thought he's drafted damn well. Everyone would acknowledge that's his strength. Even his most vehement haters would say that he's good in the draft. And I think when you look at the record, I think I just laid out a pretty clear case that the record is not quite what it seems. And when you look at it season by season, is it really Ballard? Is it really Ballard? I'll tell you, we're about to find out now. This would be the first season, in all fairness to you that don't like him, this would be the first season I'm looking, and I'm not holding the Andrew Luck thing here anymore because we finally tore it down. Let's see where we go, but don't remember this season, or don't forget, this season is about growth. It's not about winning. If winning comes, that would not only be a pleasant surprise, that would be a massive, massive overachievement. And the fact that we're in this position is not Chris Ballard's fault. He doesn't have no responsibility in it at all. But to make it like he is just all his fault, I think is ridiculous. I think he'd get fired, would be in the same spot. How do you know the next GM is better? And before you know it, you'll be pointing your finger at the next guy, okay? So let's sit here. Let's enjoy this season. Let's understand that Chris Ballard is our GM. He should be our GM. And let's move on with it and have a little bit of fun watching this team grow. It's a beautiful time to be a Colts fan. I mean, how many times as a fan base can you look at a season and say, if we're losing this season, we can still be excited about it? That's the position that we're in. So without further ado, I think I'm going to end it right there. So until next time, my name is Justin. This right here was the Ride in the Bench Coltcast. Drop your comments, drop your thoughts, drop your disagreements, drop it all down there, and let me know what you think. And, I'll get back to you again this weekend, probably multiple times because we have the game Sunday, baby, regular season football. And then I'll probably talk, preview going into Jacksonville, maybe a little bit about Richardson, Steichen, and what to expect from them. We'll see how the weekend goes. I made a promise to you earlier in the week, and I didn't quite fulfill it. I have no good excuse. If I were to give you a reason, it would just be an excuse. I got caught up in the week with the fantasy drafts and my job, whatever, right? No good excuse from me. But yeah, until next time, My name's Justin. This right here was the Ride the Bench Colts cast. Go Colts.